Good morning and welcome to Slate School and our panel discussion entitled Healthy Environments for Learning. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a new, unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, review the panel logistics, and then we'll hear from our four expert panelists. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape of education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, like today's, are free and open to the public. We're so delighted to have all of you with us today. Now I'll describe the basic logistics of this discussion. We have four amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during the next hour. Each of our panelists today will give a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key guidance and advice about healthy environments for living and learning. We'll proceed with the panel discussion then, and we'll invite you to submit additional questions if you like. We'll proceed with having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Kathy Attar. Kathy, begin by introducing yourself.
Thank you, Julie. I'm Kathy Attar. I'm the engagement manager for the Eco-Healthy Childcare program, and we are a project of the Children's Environmental Health Network. But before I worked at Eco-Healthy Childcare, I have been involved in public health and the environmental health movement, I'd say, for over 12 years, almost 15 years now. I started working in California in the Los Angeles area. I worked at a health foundation, kind of working with communities, trying to see how we can decrease health disparities. From there, I moved into a smaller nonprofit setting, and that's where I really looked and started advocating around the idea of how children's health is impacted by our environment, environmental hazards, air pollution, climate change. So I started a lot of that work in Los Angeles, and then I also worked at this nonprofit looking to increase health professionals' engagement in the policy advocacy process. And then we left Los Angeles and I actually moved to Connecticut for about a year. Lived in Hartford area. And then from there I moved to DC, which is where I am right now. And I've been working with the Eco-Healthy Childcare program for just a little over almost 3 years now. I have 2 kids, an 11-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. And I think in terms of advice for now, right now, because we are in the midst of a global pandemic and COVID-19, I think our work, Eco-Healthy Childcare, is really trying to kind of meet the needs of childcare providers right now, currently, but also really trying to look beyond those immediate needs and to look kind of a longer term and see how we can make some improvements and everlasting changes as it relates to environmental health within the childcare setting. And so just 30 seconds more about the Eco-Healthy Childcare program. So we partner with childcare providers, licensing professionals, really looking to increase their awareness and also change best practices around how they can eliminate environmental hazards. So unsafe plastics, pesticides in the childcare setting. And so I can get into a little bit more specifically about some of our programs, but I'll just leave it there for now.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And our next panelist is Paolo Campos. Hi, Paolo.
Morning. Thank you for having me, Julie and Jennifer. My name is Paolo Campos. I'm an associate principal at Patriquin Architects, who is the design and architect of record for Slate School over on Mansfield Road in North Haven. We are very proud and very honored to have been involved in the project and to maintain our current involvement with the school as the program evolves and as the facility evolves. I came to architecture after wanting to be an aerospace engineer. I grew up on Long Island, not far from where Grumman tested the F-14 Tomcat. So I grew up watching the plane sweep its wings back and go into supersonic mode. And I thought, that's amazing. I always wanted to be kind of techie and hands-on. And then somehow landed in architecture, of all things, as this kind of culmination of tech, arts, and sort of trying to do better for people. I was in graduate school at a time when the School of Architecture at Yale had two very highly regarded engineers and environmentalists teaching the systems integration course. One of them was Patrick Bellew, who Larry knows from Atelier 10, and the other is Thomas Auer from a German company called TransSolar. And they really pushed us to think about not building efficiency, but holistic approaches to design, engineering, and construction. And healthy buildings was something that they preached, not so far as picking materials, but just saying buildings have an impact on their occupants, and occupants should be comfortable, they should be safe, they should feel healthy, and they should be nourished to do whatever it is they need to do in these buildings. I grew up in a place where University of Stony Brook was one of the first buildings to have Legionnaire's disease back in the 1980s. So that had a specific and very impactful kind of response on me as an architect. So I've always had an interest in high-performing buildings, just a product of my time. However, I've been really gratified to see this kind of dissemination of different approaches to what is environmentally friendly design. And Slate School happens to be a really perfect meld of, we want to really pursue occupant health, occupant safety, and construction safety. And really took us down some amazing rabbit holes that we're still learning about today, that I'm happy to talk about. But Larry could talk a little bit soon about this, but there's a lot of resources out there that we have taken advantage of. Jennifer Staple Clark, the founder of Slate School, really pushed this. And to her credit, she is one of the toughest and most hard-minded clients and uncompromising clients I've ever worked with. And I say that in very good ways, because that uncompromising attitude really made everybody on the team step up, not just us, our engineers, the contractors, everyone on the team. And that really is an amazing thing and a great achievement to be a part of. So happy to be here and happy to talk more about this as we go on.
Awesome. Awesome. And now I'll just introduce Gary Cohen. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to be with you, Julie, and all of you. My story is that I've been involved in environmental health advocacy for 35 years. And I started by being asked to write a guidebook, an organizing guide for families who were living under the threat of toxic chemical exposure. It was in the mid-1980s, and the Bhopal chemical disaster had happened in India, where thousands of people died one night because a pesticide factory blew up. And people in the United States were worried, well, that could happen in my neighborhood. And at the time, there was no laws that allowed people the right to know about the chemical hazards in their community, what chemicals were going out into the air or into the water or into toxic dumps near them. And so I got involved in both writing a guide to help people organize around these issues, but also a national movement that was growing around people's basic environmental health rights. And so early thing happened is that we were able to win the National Right to Know law, which allows people the information that companies have to submit about the chemicals that they're releasing into the environment. And I got involved in supporting a lot of organizations and community people, mothers and fathers sitting around kitchen tables wondering why their kids were sick because of the pollution in their communities. And 10 years into that, I started an organization called Healthcare Without Harm, which was focused on addressing the environmental impact of the healthcare sector, which was a big industrial enterprise, and they were major polluters. And from the point of view of saying, look, you can't have healthy people on a sick planet. If you address the environment through people's health, which is something that everybody cares about, every family cares about the health of their children. If we can organize people around the health of their communities, it's a very powerful vehicle. And so we took on the question of the healthcare sector because it's the one sector of the economy that has healing as its mission. And we said, if we're going to transform our society to be healthier, to address toxics, to address climate change, to address the fact that our food system actually contributes to disease as opposed to health, who better yet to work with than the sector that actually lives by this oath to first do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. And so we've been about transforming this sector to address its own environmental footprint, but also to be an anchor for supporting communities that they serve around creating healthy environments in their community and addressing the larger environmental health issues that we all face.
Amazing. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And now finally, I'd like to introduce Larry Jones. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody. I'm Larry Jones. I'm an associate director at a company called Atelier 10. We are a collection of architects and engineers, and we consult on everything sustainable. So typically we get hired by architects like Paolo, and we're brought onto the team to help inform the design and help push for higher goals and targets to make a high performance building. And what we really focus on is everything from the shape and form of the building to have it behave passively as much as possible before we bring in all the energy intensive equipment, to modeling the building to look at how we can make it more energy efficient using mechanical equipment, and then finally looking at the occupant experience and what we can do to optimize daylight and better indoor air quality for the people who are going to be living in that building for a long period of time. I started off, I still am an environmental engineer, but I started my career really also in the Los Angeles area, doing a lot of compliance work, working with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, the Regional Water Authority, the Air Resources Board in Northern Cal, really working with a lot of the refineries and heavy polluters in the area to bring them into compliance, as well as working with them to develop what we call environmental management systems. So really focusing on the process and having them identify what their aspects and their impacts are, and from there really driving down so that all people in the organization understand what the whole goal is overall. I started, I was always pushing the sustainability part, and I was in that firm. I was a small entity of sustainability, and I eventually moved back to the East Coast to get more involved with a lot of projects that were going on here at Yale, and a year later joined Atelier 10, and so I've been with them for 13 years now.
Great. Well, we were talking a little bit before the panel began about the unusual times that we find ourselves in, and I'm curious a little bit because for many of us, for many of our students right now, for many children, they're at school at home, and my home was built in 1927, and I wonder about the environment that my children are learning in right now. And I just wonder, I'm asking Kathy, what are some ways that parents and educators can learn about the materials that surround them and their children in their schools that aren't too scary or overwhelming? And actually, this time brings the question, what are we living in? And
Right.
And I think I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, I think because you're right, everyone is now spending X number of hours in their home. If we are fortunate enough to, right? We have to take into consideration folks who might not have a home, right? Folks who are homeless, families who are homeless. And then we have to take into account essential workers who are not able to spend as much time as I am and many of us can. But so I think we definitely need to acknowledge those folks as well. But this idea of a healthy home, I think is a good one. This concept of, taking a look around and seeing the structure of your home, the indoor air quality, what types of cleaning products you're using, fragrance products. And for us at Eco Healthy Childcare, we are really focused on offering realistic and kind of cost-effective best practices for creating healthier indoor environments, whether it be a childcare facility or whether it be a family childcare facility where they are actually using their home to take care of children. And so, that's kind of like where we recommend folks start, is really looking at what things that they could do almost immediately, right? You can take a look around and see if you're using air fresheners, for example, this idea of fragrance products, because unfortunately a lot of fragrance products have chemicals in them that are not great for us, particularly children. So, a quick tip would be get rid of your air fresheners. You can improve your indoor air quality by just improving your ventilation, opening windows, things like that, using fans. Another, kind of best practice that folks could do relatively quickly is taking a look at the things that they're using to clean with, especially now, right? With COVID-19, everyone has kind of stepped up their cleaning game, which is great, but we have also found that unfortunately there have been increases in calls to poison control as a result of folks using cleaning products, misusing them or inhaling them. And so we really need to take a look at how we are cleaning and disinfecting. And so we have a best practice where folks can choose certain third-party certified green cleaning products. That's another kind of easier way to go. Or if you're inclined, you can make your own cleaning supplies using baking soda and vinegar. Disinfectants are a little more tricky, but there are also resources out there where you can choose safer disinfectants. And so, I think for us, like I said, the emphasis is really looking at things that you can do immediately, realistic, cost-effective, that are accessible to everyone, whether it be folks who have more resources or folks who have less. And so that's kind of our immediate strategy in terms of when we're either if we're talking to parents or we're talking to childcare providers.
Great. Larry, I wonder, I think in the process of being part of the creation of Slate School, I learned so much that as a teacher and administrator, I didn't know about in terms of healthy building. And I'm so grateful to Paolo for all that. I really am. And to Jennifer. But I think that the environmental and human health considerations about building materials, I think, are not typically well known. When I give a tour of the school and I talk about the way the school was built, people are very surprised. And I just wonder, what do you think maybe the public, the average person, would find most surprising about materials that are commonly used in current practice of building? Maybe you could talk to that a little bit.
Oh, sure. Well, that's absolutely true. I think even through my career, the amount of knowledge that I've gained from project to project, and I'm fortunate to work with a number of people, including folks from the School of Public Health at Harvard, folks like Joe Allen and to have him sit in front of you and kind of spill out exactly what we're constantly exposed to on a daily basis, it is very surprising and unnerving at the same time. I think for the most part, like there's over 80,000 man-made chemicals out there, and out of that, it's a very small fraction of what's being regulated and considered safe. And so there's, because of that, it's created this movement of transparency. And, the environmental movement has been grassroots from the beginning, and even this movement is grassroots from the start. So it's designers like ourselves that, and owners like you that are pushing this movement forward and really pushing these manufacturers to get an understanding of what's in their product. Things like antimicrobials, to understand what's an antimicrobial and that it can mimic a hormone like estrogen. They're in soaps and deodorants, like Kathy was mentioning, but they're also, being put on doorknobs and other aspects that, people are touching every day, surfaces, lab benches or table surfaces as well. That's one of them. Phthalates that are known to disrupt fertility and male reproductive development. Vinyl is found in vinyl products. PFAS, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, can also affect the hormone and immune responses. And these are things that you find in, like in a product like Scotchgard. And other stain-resistant type materials, which are put on carpet and furniture, even in your car. Your car seats, you can order your car and have Scotchgard put on it. Those kind of things. Flame retardants are another big piece. They are known to affect neurodevelopment and may increase risk of cancer. And those are found in in your couch. If you have foam cushions, you can turn your cushion over, look at the label, and it'll tell you if it has flame retardants in it or not. Also found in foam insulation, in shades, in wall base. Those kind of things are, just a small example of what's in there. The nice thing about it, especially with flame retardants, especially for the homeowner, there are tons of products out there that you can look, as Kathy was mentioning, and you can go to a place like IKEA, and they have two lines, one with and without. But there's a movement to remove flame retardants out of these materials because they're known not to. They even put them in kids' pajamas, and they're known not to have any effect. But what it does is, heaven forbid, your house or your building does catch on fire. It's the first responders that are being affected by those burning chemicals now. So.
Wow.
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing that's interesting about what Kathy and Larry just said is that it's taken kind of grassroots movement and activated citizenry to try to figure out what we're all being exposed to. And the reality is that we shouldn't all have to be PhD chemists to figure out what pajamas to get for our kids, or what toys, or what should be in our buildings. They should be healthy by design. And so part of the problem is that the economy has been built from the petrochemical industry and the fossil fuel industry without consideration for people's health. So all the profits are internalized, but all of the social and environmental harm are externalized. And it's up to us to figure out what the problem is. And so there's a way in which we all, and the people listening, we need to exercise our voices, our political muscle, our civic duty to try to detox our economy, because the pollution has not only been about our bodies and about our buildings and about our cosmetics and about our cleaning supplies, but it's been about our democracy. And that the problem that I've seen over 35 years is that the industry has done so much to confuse people, to deny the problems, to limit their liability. And so it takes all of us trying to figure out how do we design safer buildings without brominated flame retardants in them, or how do we use safer products that don't give our kids cancer. We need actually a functioning democracy and regulatory system that has health and equity built into its DNA, as opposed to us having to fight for that on the back end.
Wow, yes, absolutely. And I'm wondering, Gary, so what do we do? I mean, do we write letters? How do we make our voices heard?
I think all of the things that all the folks that are on this call are doing is that I think we have to detox our economy, and that's our buildings, that's our cosmetics, that's our hospitals, that's our schools, that's our homes, that's our food. The thing that I've discovered in all this work is that the companies that are downstream from the fossil fuel and chemical industry, they don't have an inherent interest in putting toxic chemicals in their products. Why would they? If there's safer alternatives and they could be made cost effective, then people will adopt them. I mean, we've seen that so many ways. And now, these guys are working on safer buildings. We've gotten 90 companies to tell us what products that they have that we could put in hospitals for building materials and furnishings that don't have vinyl, that don't have flame retardants, that don't have perfluorinated chemicals, that don't have all these other toxins in them. And it turns out they have them. So we have to create the demand,
right,
of citizens across the board, across the entire economy for those safer products, is one. And the second is that we've been taught in America to exercise our consumer muscle. We're always told to buy stuff. But what we really need is we need to exercise our civic muscle, to get engaged, to wherever we find ourselves, to raise our voices, to be involved in ways to change wherever we find ourselves, whatever seat we find ourselves, whether it's our schools, our communities, our state governments, or our national governments, or our international policy. We have to engage as active people on this planet.
And could I just add? Yeah.
sure.
And we like to say that you can't shop your way out of this problem, right? It's just impossible to purchase free and healthier and free products, nor should we. And I agree, Gary is completely right. One of the things that the Children's Environmental Health Network, we're a part of several different coalitions, and one of the coalitions is called the Cancer Free Economy. And it really is just about what Gary is talking about, shifting the paradigm, right? Kind of getting businesses, government agencies, parents, consumers to kind of rethink how our economies work. And when it comes to our eco-healthy childcare program, we are also looking to change policies and regulations when it comes to the childcare field. So unfortunately, the childcare arena, there are no national environmental health standards, right? Unlike the school systems, some schools have, some national standards, but when it comes to childcare, there aren't. And so it's really a state by state, even county by county, when it comes to childcare licensing. And so we are targeting several different states to kind of look at those childcare licensing regulations to see how we can actually put in some of our best practices into those regulations. We're also looking to see, there are national accreditation standards when it comes to childcare. So you can get become accredited by certain national organizations, which I'm sure the Slate School knows all about. And within those accreditation standards, we've actually worked to incorporate quite a few of our environmental health best practices as kind of another way of looking at kind of systems changes. And so I agree, you have to really looking at both increasing awareness, but also changing systems, changing policies, changing regulations as well.
It's eye-opening, actually, just to contemplate the breadth of it all. So I want to ask you, Paolo. I know you've done so much research about healthy school environments, and I'm wondering, what surprised you the most? What did you have to rethink? And then actually beyond that, what resources were actually helpful in doing that?
So let me start with the easy one first, and that's the resources. we are fortunate that Kathy and Gary's voices have been heard by people who are much smarter and much more well-funded than I am. And so there's been lots of work done, and even better, scientific, repeatable studies done that have been, you know, empirically proven and also peer-reviewed and tested to assess what is working better than what we've done in the past. So here are ways to eliminate volatile organic compounds from adhesives or flooring products, or eliminate formaldehydes from other common building materials. And there's studies that show why that's better, because the body is actually pretty adaptive at removing these chemicals. You know, our immune systems, our endocrine systems, they can do this. They've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. But in the 20th century, we hyper concentrated these things in our buildings. And sometimes, and this is going to get to kind of the first question, is that was done because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. You know, we used asbestos for a long time because it was this amazing material that made buildings more inherently fireproof. And fire was the #1 cause of death related to buildings for a very long time. So voila, magic material, problem solved. And we only come to realize decades later, yikes, not good, because of this, and this that hadn't really ever been studied or considered before. So now with that knowledge and awareness, you know, we are better at understanding where materials come from, what impacts they have in sourcing them, and what impact they have when they're put in our buildings, you know, kind of on day one while the contractor's still there doing the construction, but then after they're gone, and what's happening, what's off-gassing, what's not. And gladly, there's these resources available. You know, several institutions, the International Living Future Institute is probably the paragon of this, but they have essentially ingredients declarations. You know, they have something called the Declare List and the Red List. And these are essentially touted as shopping labels for the materials that I, as the architect, am looking to specify. So I know when I pick a certain flooring product that I can look on their website and browse the actual ingredients. The companies have declared, you know, put out there, this is what we use in our manufacturing. And that is something that hasn't ever been required before, and still isn't to this day, except for the fact, as Gary mentions, consumers, building owners, architects, engineers are saying, we won't specify your product unless you tell us what's in it. That's a paradigm shift. And that's been happening a lot. As I mentioned, the Living Future Institute is just one. Underwriters Laboratories, UL, they have a program called Green Guard, and that is very similar in spirit and intent. And this is just beginning to snowball. We're seeing a lot more interest in this, fortunately. And so there's a lot of stuff out there for me, at least, for buildings, for structures, for mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. What I found disappointing, and Jennifer Staple Clark and I can relate to this, is that doesn't exist everywhere yet. So things that go outside, pesticides, there isn't as much kind of peer-reviewed information available out there to design and construction professionals yet. So that's been surprising. That's been a challenge for us to navigate, especially at Slate School and other projects where you have kids out in nature. We need to be protective of that nature. So we need to keep on kind of keeping it pristine and beautiful and not use pesticides in the process. We need to think about the cleaning products, you know, soaps that we use, cleaning agents that we use. So it's getting there, I'm glad to say. And you know, this is one case where the building industry seems to have been a leader, which is very unusual in my experience. But that was the most surprising part of it, is that it's not everywhere. And I wish it were, because it would make our jobs much easier. So.
Yes. So it's so interesting. I recognize just my undeserved good fortune at coming to school in a place like this every day. in fact, when people ask me sometimes what my biggest challenge at work is, it's leaving, because it's such a wonderful place to be. And I was absolutely floored and actually kind of devastated to see that the average age of a school in our country is 44 years. It's 44 years old. And so I'm wondering if Larry can speak to this a little bit, based on what was best practice 44 years ago. What are some of the health issues that we might expect in some of those schools, and what are some of the challenges that we might be facing as a country in trying to retrofit it or remodel it to make it healthy? Our kids
Sure.
deserve that.
No, absolutely. Well, just one brief comment based on what Paolo mentioned. I think one of the issues in this movement is that there are many different entities basically tracking what healthy materials are out there, and they're each creating their own database. Even the ex-CEO of Google, Larry Page, started his own called Portico, but everybody's doing their individual thing, but nobody's talking to each other. And it would be one of my frustrations is that I would love for these folks to just kind of bring their smart minds together and create one entity where everybody can share their effort together and create one big resource. And going on to your question, so existing buildings happen to be one of my favorite typologies that I get to work on. I've been working on a number of existing buildings for the past 8 years or so. So I think one of the biggest things, Paolo already mentioned, is the miracle fiber, asbestos. And when we go into existing buildings and they're being retrofitted, whether it's a school or repurposing an existing building for a new typology, asbestos, lead paint, mold are kind of the first three to come to mind. They're called like hot materials, and the unfortunate thing is they're either removed entirely or encapsulated, but none of it can be recycled. It has to go into haz waste storage or entity once it's removed from the buildings. But the interesting thing, especially with schools, is especially in our state of Connecticut, some schools are fully retrofitted, some are half, and the old is kept for a while and they're retrofitting half of it. So it's interesting to see, I haven't worked on that hybrid personally, but the idea of how that decision is made to whether you're going to remove it all or you're going to try to cap it. And if you're capping it, it's still existing in the building, and those microfibers are probably still creating, people are still being exposed to them in some ways because they're floors, ceiling, insulation for boilers and what have you. I think some of the lessons learned, it's interesting. I found clients such as yourselves at the Slate School are the best clients because, like Paolo mentioned, you push and you're saying, well, the answer comes and the next question back is, well, what else? And what else can we do? And I was fortunate to have a client like that for a living building in Pittsburgh, and she like you guys are a rarity because the living building challenge was the goal. But on a general project, it's really hard to convince a client to say, okay, how about we reuse these doors and we repurpose these for something else? Or, this furniture still looks pretty good. What do you think about investing in and rehabbing it? And that's a difficult sell. Occasionally we're successful in it, but most of the times we're looking for places to send it either to be recycled or potentially reused. Yale University used to be really good. I forget the gentleman's name, but that was his sole job on campus, going around and finding old materials that could be stored and then finding a new purpose for it somewhere on campus. And I can't speak to whether that's still happening, but he was kind of the guru for that institution. And I'm just not sure what's happening in other institutions or other main campuses like that.
Right. That's great. I'm wondering now. I just hear this, a little bit of a theme, and I'm wondering if maybe Gary and Kathy can just speak to this idea of how we help, how we get this message out. How do we help people to understand, and obviously in a very complicated world with challenges for some people that I can't even fathom, but how do we get this information out that we need to be advocating for healthy school and healthy learning environments for our children? Just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Gary.
Well, a couple of things that are helpful. One is that the science has galloped along over the last, since I started work 35 years ago, and there's a lot stronger case for the links between a number of these chemical exposures and different chronic diseases that we face, like cancer and learning disabilities. There's strong evidence about the kind of poor food quality that we have, and it's linked to diabetes and obesity and stroke and heart disease. There's very strong links between our reliance on fossil fuels and respiratory diseases, and its links broader to climate change. So the science linking our addiction to fossil fuels, toxic chemicals, and industrial agriculture to the diseases that so many of us face in our lives is very strong. And so that gives people a sense of motivation, because once you start to tell people, actually this is linked to the environment that we are all exposed to, it's a very powerful motivator. So that's one thing, is this broad education that's happened and the science that's validated that, despite efforts to try to confuse people and create doubt and all of that, that's sort of manufactured by the industry. The other is that there's a broad business case for safer materials, for a more healthy environment, for renewable energy. From the point of view of buildings, I mean, we know that children are more productive in healthier environments, that in hospitals, if you have views of natural light and you have views of nature, you use less medications and you leave the hospital sooner. So there's all sorts of research now that shows that a healthy environment is actually good for our health. Why should that be so complicated? But now the research validates all of that. And so people are saying, yeah, that does make sense, right? For our kids. It makes sense that we wouldn't want to be putting toxic chemicals in hospital buildings when you're having people being in the most vulnerable moments in their lives where their immune systems are already compromised. So if you do it from a logical point of view, it's obvious that we need to sort of move away from our reliance on fossil fuels and toxic chemicals to an environment that's going to solve climate change, reduce our chronic disease burden, reduce our healthcare costs, and create millions of jobs. What's not to like about that? That's the sustainable development society that we all need to be building toward. And if we can reclaim our regulatory systems and our democracy, we can actually move in that direction. That's the impediment.
Yeah. Kathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, leading with the health message for us has been effective. I think sometimes when you lead with the environmental message, folks can kind of they don't make the connection. But when you're leading with the health message, most people know someone who has asthma, or they know, or their child has a learning disability, or they know someone who's had cancer, or they've had cancer. And so I think, connecting the idea of health, improved health, poor health to environmental hazards for us has been effective. And unfortunately, right, we do see trends of increases in rates of childhood chronic diseases over the past 20 years, right? The rates of asthma have increased. the rates of obesity, learning disabilities, and even childhood cancer. We're better at treating all of those diseases, but the rates of people getting them have increased. And as Gary said, all of the science now is stronger when it comes to linking exposure to chemicals in consumer products or air pollution, climate change to some of these health outcomes. And so I think for us, we've really found that, talking to people about health and better health, and using children also, children leading with the idea of being protective of children by creating healthier environments, for us has also been kind of a key messaging platform.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess, I think you've all touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if maybe you all want to chime in a little bit and sort of expand. But I guess we think of, different blends of environmentalism, and sometimes what's good for our human bodies is completely in harmony with what's good for other human communities and wider ecological communities, but not always. Safe, sustainable materials that might need to be hauled from the Pacific Northwest to be used here, or markets for sustainable products that might impact local human communities, or considerations about older reclaimed things and repurposed materials that might be contaminated with other things like heavy metals or lead. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit to some of the challenging aspects of this, and how you've encountered those and how you work to balance all those considerations. Anybody can take that. I'm watching.
Well, I'll jump in. I have to leave in a minute. I think the core thing for us has been it's been crucial to, while we're raising a problem for the health sector, in this case, because we're working to sort of address the health sector's environmental footprint, it's not been sufficient to just say, you've got a problem. We've had to show that there's a problem, but then there's a way forward, there's a solution to the problem, and that it can address some of their concerns around the cost of it. So when we started, hospitals were the largest source of dioxin emissions in the country from burning medical waste and all these PVC plastics and all that stuff. Big source of mercury. We said, you're poisoning people in service of healing them. That's so against your mission. And they said, well, what can we do? We said, well, you can reduce, you can reuse, you can reprocess a lot of the medical waste you have, so you don't have to be throwing it in the red bag. And you can move towards safer alternative technologies that don't burn it. And all of these things will save you money. And so when we started, there were almost 5,000 medical waste incinerators in the country, and a decade later, there were less than 100. And hospitals were saving money in the process, and they were learning how to do what we're trying to do at home, which is to do a better job of separating and recycling, and whole industries were started to reprocess medical devices. So I think a lot of it has to do with just seeing the entire pull through of the solution to the problem to the solution, and designing with companies and with stakeholders. How do we address all of the issues of health, environment, cost, equity, all along the supply chain? It's around building an economy where the DNA has actually got values in it: health and equity and sustainability. That's my wisdom on the subject.
Wow, that's
Great.
That's great wisdom. Gary, I know you have to take another call, but I just want to thank you so much for being with us today. If the other members of the panel are able to stay for another minute, just like to wrap up with a couple of little things. But Gary, thank you so much for your wisdom, and thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks for having me.
Gary, it was a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah, keep up your good work, all of you.
So I guess there have always been advocates for safe and healthy environments, but it does seem like it's coming to the forefront now. why do you think that's happening? Why do you think we have this really, I think, positive trajectory right now? I see you're nodding, Larry.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to, well, a couple things. First off, as far as education, I think what Kathy said in the very beginning of talking about what you're using at home, I think just like anything, education begins at home and understanding begins at home, talking about these things and what it means, and then moving towards a school. You guys at the Slate School have a wonderful opportunity, and I know that you're doing it, to use it as a teaching tool. And you went through the whole process of designing the school surrounded to be more environmental and high performing and sustainable, to use that as a teaching tool. And that's something that with all of our projects, we really strive for, even from the beginning, and talking about, okay, in similar to what Gary was mentioning, why is it important to make this decision? Why is it important that this material, you should use this material versus this material? And my charge working with folks like Paolo is to not just say, hey, use this instead, but an architect wants to know that it's a material that's quality and that will hold up, and that you as the owner won't be coming back to him and saying, hey, this stuff is peeling off the wall. I know it's more green, but it's not the same quality as the more toxic stuff. And that's a fine line that we're constantly walking and doing our due diligence to make sure, because that's a big thing. Like a consumer is going to want something that lasts and wants their money to be put on something that is going to have quality, and stand the test of time for as long as the product should last. But I think, well, I mean, all of us are living in a brand new world right now. I don't even want to say what week we're in, but as far as staying at home, but we spend our 90% of our time in buildings. And it just so happens that we're in one building now versus multiple ones on a daily basis, and only 10% outdoors, which is crazy. And I think the advocacy piece, I think a lot of the discussions in the design world now is, how do we increase the indoor air quality of our buildings? Well, we've been trying to do that anyway, but now it has the COVID or the viruses attached to it. And if anything, we have the ability now to really combine the conversations together, to make some solid decisions about how we move forward. And there's we could have a whole nother hour about all the other pieces to that as well. But I think the advocacy is there, and it's unfortunate that that it's the people that have to push it, but it really is. And I think that it starts in your individual community, and it builds from there, to the state level, to the national level, and beyond.
So a lot of moments in this crisis actually, I think, have helped us in some ways. I know that the crisis far outweighs maybe the benefits, but perhaps we're awake now to some of the things that really need our attention going forward. And frankly, that the words, build back better were really resonant with us. And one of the reasons that we started these conversations, because people are available to hear them. People are interested in all of you and your particular perspectives and your lens on this issue and so many others. And so I hope that we can find ways to balance the challenges that the world is facing right now. I want to just ask one more question, and then I promise I'll let you all go. I know you have busy lives, but we've talked so much about chemicals and the things that go into schools and into buildings and the materials, but I think also we became very efficient about creating a space where everybody could scoot in and sit down and stay all day. And I think one of the epidemics in our country is obesity, and part of that is from children being discouraged to move. We've been incentivizing stay in your seat and do nothing but learn, or something like that, replicating learning, I think. And I just wonder if maybe all of you could talk a little bit about how just help me get the word out a little bit here, that part of what we need to do in our mission to build healthy schools and to create healthy learning environments is to mandate movement, and to keep people from that sedentary lifestyle that, you know, makes them more susceptible to all kinds of illness. So I hope you have some thoughts on that, because I'd really like that message to go forward.
Yeah, so this is Kathy. I think the idea of healthy lifestyles, being active, connects to this idea of healthy communities. And so I think it does really tie back to our neighborhoods, our schools, our environments. Like, we need to ensure that the communities are safe, first of all, because unfortunately not all families have access to safe places to exercise or to even go outside. So we need to ensure that they have safe access to neighborhood playgrounds, schools. And I think the issue of harmful chemicals also kind of relates to obesity as well, because you have actually, we know the science now is telling us that some of these endocrine disrupting chemicals that are found in building supplies or in our food packaging or in fragrance products like phthalates can disrupt our hormone system and make people more susceptible to obesity. So I think it's right. It's both.
Yes.
It's both being able to be active. It's being able to have access to safe spaces for people to be active. It's also the products that were around. And of course, it's also access to healthy food too. Not all neighborhoods have stores, farmers markets,
Right.
that they can access fruits and vegetables that are healthy and affordable. And so I think it's, you know, it's kind of looking both at the individual, but then again, taking a step back and also seeing how we can create spaces, communities that allow people and make it easy for them to be active and to be healthy.
Kathy, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think in those communities where it's challenging to be outdoors, where it might not be possible to go to a gym or have that kind of thing, it's even more important that we, as people who create spaces for schools where children are spending 6.5 hours of their day, that there is embedded in those schools the absolute mandate of movement. I know, you know, Paolo was, you know, amazing about this, and we continue to talk about it in all of our conversations about school, about, you know, varying the levels of things, making sure kids are reaching up and bending over and moving around, and that we're not stuck in one central location all day long, and that we have to move to a different place to get the thing that we need. And we haven't made it so just too easy to stay stuck, because I think creating a movement toward movement in the school creates a movement toward movement everywhere. And kids that are empowered in that way, I think, statistically do better no matter what their situation. So it's all the more important that we focus on that, since in some situations we might be their only opportunity for thinking like that, because they might be thinking on a whole nother survival level. And if we can provide that opportunity here, I think we must. I think we absolutely must.
Well, there's been studies that by allowing play, allows the students or the kids to focus better once they're in the classroom. Yes. Richard Louv wrote a book, Last Child in the Woods, and it's a wonderful book, really eye-opening, but it's all about demonizing play and how it has been kind of, for lack of a better word, demonized and preventing kids from getting out there and exploring and touching nature and having aspects to it. You know, thinking back, I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia, but I was fortunate that, you know, what nature was around me, I was out there all the time. And I was personally walking to school on my own by 3rd grade, 4th grade, and living in Connecticut, which is technically the first time I lived in the suburbs. You know, it's a bit different. And, you know, I'm even advocating for sidewalks in my town. And because if you just want to go beyond a certain distance, you can't, or then you're in the road. And it's things like that that I agree with Kathy. Starting at the town level and the community level. In a design level, Paolo and I talk about what they call active design guidelines. There's some active design guidelines out there where when we think about a building, we try to put the main stair closer to the entrance versus the elevator, which inherently introduces people to that first, and that's their first option, all the while respecting compatibility with ADA, and things like that. Or there's aspects out there in the design community called there's a well system, and it's another benchmarking system out there, but it's all about the wellness of the occupant, and everything from the type of food that's being designed or going to be put into the cafeteria in the building to naturally ventilating the building to better indoor air quality, water quality, and activity.
Yeah. Yes. A big yes to all of that.
So Julie, just to chime
Yeah.
in quickly, I want to go back to something that Gary said about kind of the change and the opportunity that I think we've touched on here because of COVID. I would love, the optimist in me would love to have a revolution occur at every level and everything just to be better tomorrow. You walk into a room and everything is better, but that doesn't happen. So I'm a firm believer in finding the little drops that you can use to fill the bucket. So at home, open up your windows, open up your window shades, get filtered water and drink water. Do common sense things that have been proven to have an impact that I think both Kathy and Gary would have a lot of evidence that backs up some of these very commonsensical things. But also, us designers, we need clients like you guys too, clients like Kathy as well, that are always challenging us to bring these principles at play. Designers, contractors, the professionals that build and make reality or make these things into reality are charged with a lot of detail things that, it's very easy to lose the big picture in the weeds. And it's always good, in the process to be drawn back to that big picture and try to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. And the how comes after that. Don't let the how drive the boat. Instead, let what we're trying to achieve drive it. So.
Awesome. On with the mission, I say. On with the mission. Yeah. I'm just so grateful to all of you and to Gary as well for agreeing to do this panel today. I learned so much from you all, and I'm so grateful to you for coming, and I'm grateful for the people for their ability to hear it, because we're just 6, but with everyone else on board, we can make a lot of difference. So I'm going to say goodbye and thank you in the way that we conclude all of our meetings here at Slate School. I'm going to wish you all well, and I'm sending you all, wherever you are, positive rice. Positive.